Tenemos unos 20-25 minutos.
So we have now 20-25 minutes, more or less, to be able to react to what we have been listening to this morning. There have been words that have repeated: sacred space, encounter, reconciliation, sanation. There might be questions, or maybe people that want to just explain what these interventions have, the impact, how they have lived or perceived everything.
I'm working as a psychoanalyst, and I have a question concerning spiritual healing, which was present in all three presentations. And I'm addressing my question to Frank. Thank you for your experience. And please allow some skepticism, which is not against the endeavor, but in order to provide what you may call in French a garde-fou, a kind of cross-checking. Because in my practice, what is really a risk, especially in the Catholic Church, is too fast and speak about reconciliation and healing. When you, for instance, when you meet people with a history of sexual abuse and you talk about reconciliation and healing, it may be re-traumatizing. So my question is, how do you, in this really wounding conflict in Rwanda and in Burundi, how do you introduce this cross-checking in order to avoid re-traumatization, in order to respect the very slow way towards reconciliation, in order to avoid talking about something you cannot force, you cannot obtain it by one action or 1 week of exercise. It's really a journey, and very often people during their whole life maintain those wounds. And first of all, we have to respect wounds, and we cannot abolish them. So this is my question: what about garde-fou?
Thank you very much for your question. So the request of the regional superior was to do something toward reconciliation and healing. We never use these words during the process. If something happens, something will happen. I don't know, between two people. I know someone who had to flee to Congo and came back, and he said, really, he told us himself that something happened in him, being welcomed and listened to. But in all the proposals, there is nowhere now it is the day of reconciliation, or healing, or we are going to have a prayer group for healing. No, not at all. So really, as I said, we share we look at our history and we listen to our stories. We welcome them. And it's mostly a retreat around listening to each other in respect as much as possible. And I cannot say how far people went into maybe being a bit reconciled with their history. I don't know. Reconciled about the fact that maybe in my community, I have someone whose parents have been involved and mine were killed, we are very prudent. We are very prudent, really. And I think it's, I'm convinced it's a very, 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 very small step, but just listening to each other and trying to uncover a little bit of my story in a very atmosphere of respect. So that's what I think we try to do.
Okay, thank you. And so I think it's a good idea to be prudent with the terms.
The title is
healing and reconciliation.
Yeah, I agree. It's the goal, very far.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. My intervention is more of a reaction because everything you shared this morning takes me or leads me to the dialogue, the discussion we had yesterday afternoon about what's negotiable or not. And the experience you've been talking about makes me go to the principle of the foundation. So basically, man has been born to encounter God, each one of us. But the experiences that you shared, all of you shared with us, make me think that we should be brave enough to go to the very last consequences of the principle of foundation. Everything on the face of the earth will have to be taken in so far. And I mean, the spiritual exercises are on the face of the earth too. So they will have to be taken too, and they are not an end in themselves, but rather a way to make that encounter possible. So then the question is not so much if we take this out of the equation, are there still exercises? That's not the question. The question for me is, does this lead to the encounter with God? That's the question for me. In some conversations with Javier, well, I listened, and the spiritual way looks for a balance between faithfulness and audacity. So what are the elements of faithfulness and which on the way for audacity? Because I'm sure that the answer of each one will be different, and maybe it's practically impossible to find consensus in that. And the way I see it, this faithfulness to the principle of foundation would be to accompany the person to the threshold of encounter. And audacity is the adaptation, the accommodation that the society knows so much about, and that your experiences are a marvelous, brilliant example. Thank you.
Yo tenía una pregunta.
I had a question. Yes, following brother, about healing. I have discovered in my work in prison, well, I wasn't going to do so, but after going through a number of groups of exercises, I started ending every session with the sacrament of healing. It's a very simple gesture, and I think that this human touch is important. Yes, so then I tell the inmates, I say, don't forget that you are a son made to the, in the image of God, and the Holy Ghost and God is working in you. I do the sign of the cross on their hands, and this invites you, really to this sacrament in prison. It's small. I didn't know if it would have a meaning for them, but I have to say that yes, indeed, I've done this every week now. And once, because of a lack of time, I nearly left without doing it. And they called me, they said, Daniel, don't leave, please, give us the, so I got the impression that for them, the most important part of all of those 2 hours I spent with them is really this gesture, this sacramental gesture. And it is very beautiful to see how Well, I don't know. I simply wanted to ask you, I mean, do you think
if you think that the sacrament of healing has some place in this work or of lightening the burden?
Thank you very much. I didn't think about it. So I didn't think about introducing the sacrament of healing in this concrete process. What comes to my mind, it's maybe what we said just before. Is it not to go too fast, or it could be forcing? Maybe I could propose for some, I would say, but not for all. And there, maybe I have a bit of a problem, because really what is important there is to be together on the same journey. But we have the Eucharist, because we have all Jesuits. We go to the Eucharist every day, so that's, I'm not forcing anything there. Yeah, thank you for the question. It makes me think.
Thank you, Dan. When you were talking about sacrament of healing, I wasn't sure, but I think you're talking about anointment. Is that okay? All right, thank you. No, certainly, I agree, but actually, I would disagree. Because I actually like the way you put it in terms of sacrament of healing, because that's broader than the anointment of the sick, and in the sense that I would argue that that beautiful ritual of washing of the feet at the end of that retreat was a beautiful example of a sacrament of healing. And as you mentioned, I also visit prisoners in jail in Melbourne. And the most important part of, we come and celebrate Mass together, we have a meal together, but at the end is the blessing, is the laying hands on their heads that is really important. And if it is not done, then something certainly is missing. And I guess it is that encounter with one another. In terms of this particular program of exercises to lift the burden, to lighten the burden, not to lift it, to lighten the burden. That's why the importance of the accompaniers is so essential. But the beautiful thing, well, I hope it's a beautiful thing about the program too, is it's not all on the shoulders of the accompaniers, but also it's offered, that sacrament of healing is offered by those who are participating in the program together. And that's why it's so important to come together and to be able to share their experiences together. Part of the exercises allow for rituals, and I think that's in a way what we're talking about. It's so important to be able to visualize, so it doesn't all stay in words, but it becomes deeds, concrete deeds that we can see, that we can smell, that we can touch, and offer that gift of presence to one another, which I believe is healing. And also, I'd like to add, in terms of what you were asking earlier, I think the importance of programs like this, of the work that we do, and I don't think we can trivialize or minimize their importance, is that we can offer certain skills to people who never had them before, or they had them and were not aware that they had those skills. So having had this experience of an 8-day retreat, and to be able to realize I have the ability to listen with compassion, with empathy, with care for the other. I can continue to do this in the future, in my encounters with others. And even more importantly, I can share that with others so they can use those skills as well. And so the process continues. It'll be quicker for others. It'll take longer for others. I agree with you. It's very important to keep that word healing, to be very careful. Language is so powerful, and it also means different things for different people. When I think of healing, I think of freedom. And when I think of spiritual exercises, I think of freedom. And so the connection between the two is that healing. And it's healing in terms of freedom from things that bind you. And that's why we can only lighten, it will never go away. 30 years later, a young, well, he's not so young, he was 7 when he arrived in Australia, he's 37 now. His spirituality is spirituality of a victim. That's how he sees the world. The world owes him. And Jesuits, Vietnamese Australian Jesuits who have worked with him for many years, say, unless he's able to change, to look beyond that sense of being a victim, he will never be free and he will never experience the healing that he needs. But we can only be respectful to the process that every person has to go through. We cannot force it. We can only be there, accompany, affirm, provide our presence to them.
Desde que empezó la pregunta sobre sanación.
Since the question on healing started, yes, since this question of healing started, all of us here, with no exception, have lived the experience of feeling that in the exercises, we are lightened of a burden, we are given forgiveness, and we come out of them really feeling that we want to forgive. And furthermore, years and years of therapy have not achieved what 1 week or a month of exercises has achieved. But it's inexplicable. It's the work of the spirit. I studied psychology, by the way, so my first reaction when I went to my first spiritual exercises was, what went on within me? What's happened to me? What happened to me during this week? The way I arrived, I mean, I left being a different person. So honestly, it's a pity, but I have to say that I said, then what's the secret of this? What's going on in these 8 days? And still my answer is, the spirit works in inexplicable ways. And as regards this, yes, of the sacrament, well, in Hispanic culture, signs are really very, very important. They really are. And it's not surprising, rather, it's pretty common that during the spiritual exercises, people look for some sign. They look for confession. They want the priest to give them a special blessing, an anointment, that the candle, a special candle is blessed, the candle that has a special place, it's kind of pride of place in their home. The sign is so important for them. So, well, I think that this, well, we can't say whether it's going to happen or it's going to be part of something, but yes, there is healing going on. And yes, signs are necessary because people, at least in our experience, people look for signs and they need them. Somebody here wants to talk?
Fredrik, the Jesuita de Suecia.
Yeah, Fredrik, a Jesuit from Sweden. I have a question for Ramon and Sandra, and for Sasha maybe too. Let's see, as to nationality and cultural identity, national identity, well, does this come up in your retreats when Latinos or people from Latin America leave their country of origin, travel to the United States? My question is there a biculturality that is dramatized or worked on during the retreats? And the background of my question is that the Jesuit in Berkeley, Eduardo Fernandez, in the School of Theology, says that Mexicans, but sometimes other Latinos, don't really feel sufficiently American of the United States, but don't feel completely Mexican, yeah? Because they have left their country behind. And so they are kind of between both cultural worlds. I don't know, because you said that the exercises do eventually make persons feel foreign at the end of the exercises. And I wonder how they get to this result of feeling or not feeling foreigners. Well, the case of migrants in the US, practically 60% come from Mexico. And then smaller amounts come from Cuba and Puerto Rico, especially in the New York area. And well, the rest are small minorities of 5, 6, 7%, Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, and so on. I feel that on the one hand, there is a common culture of a Latino, the Hispanic culture as such, and we discovered this as well in the exercises, of course. It's what Sandra was saying about the signs and the way to pray. We said it in our document, they leave their culture and the way they practice that popular religion, and they go to a country where they have to learn a new culture that has another way of practicing religion. There is sometimes, you have subtle nuances between different nationalities. For example, Colombian people and people from Guatemala, Honduras, Panama. They get there and there are some nuances, but they are less perceivable than in the case in the exercises. The case of migrants is particularly interesting because they are the ones that arrive for the first time. It's what we term the migrants who are living there, and they are the ones that open the vein in the country. Yeah, but when their children are born and then they become American citizens, and then you have second and third generation migrants, well, then it's interesting because there are 3 generations and 3 subgroups in the Latinos in the United States. And each one, yes, there are some differences. One group, they speak 100% Spanish. They follow their culture, their TV programs, everything the same as the country they left. Yeah. Then others that mix a bit because they kind of going to school or they work in an American environment, and others who are born there and they are 100%, English speakers, and well, with Spanish peppered at home for things with mommy about food in the kitchen and so on. So they are 3 generations in one. And it makes it a very kind of heterogeneous, interesting group. In the case of the exercises, I think that, well, many of the subtleties are not perceived. I mean, maybe the Virgin, yes? The favorite virgin of somebody from Honduras or Colombia or an Argentinian is different to the Guadalupe Virgin for the Mexicans, yeah? So, yeah, well, that sometimes... or the Virgin of Chiquinquirán for the Colombians. Well, yes, there are some subtle nuances, but I feel that the reception, yes, the way they live those encounters with God, as we said, in a foreign country where you are struggling plenty to become integrated, struggling to be acknowledged, very often without documents, where you're trying to get stability. Well, there, because of this enormous sacrifice they do for their children, I think that the exercises are for them joy, a breath of fresh air, to feel loved by God. It really lightens their burden. It's been a blessing for us to learn this. And finally, I want to link this with what we said yesterday. Somebody mentioned, what is it that motivates you to give a company in the exercises? Well, in our case, we were talking about it, Sandra and I, last night. We do this because of the huge blessing that one feels when you witness the action of God on other people. It's an incredible experience. We are lay people, coming from the professional academic world, and the fact of being, of witnessing God's action and the transformation of these people, and this happening in front of our eyes, is an experience I don't have words to express. I can't describe its magnitude, the huge impact that it has on us. And this is the reason, in the case of Casa Quino, there are so many people who have wanted to become persons who accompany because they've gone through the experience, to feel the action of God on other people and be a discreet witness, of the way God works on others. It is something that fills us with joy, enthusiasm, happiness, and it makes us want to keep on growing in these exercises.
Just to add, in Australia, with the exception of 0.5% of the population who are indigenous peoples, we're all migrants. We have all come, and with the difference with the United States, that we are only 25 million people. We're not over 350 million people. I would add, in terms of forcibly displaced peoples, the creation of identity does take time, and it takes time, you know, whether you are forcibly displaced or not. But one thing that I've noticed is because people have been forcibly displaced from their homes, there's always that sense that, not always, but there is often the sense that we have abandoned our people behind. And how did we get to be so lucky to be here, safe in Australia? So there is that very deep connection to the country of origin with the responsibility to do something for those who are left behind. And many of the young Australians who I've met of Sudanese origin, for example, they're working very hard, Syrians as well, or Afghanis, to be able to do something for their country, not just for their country, Australia, but for the country of origin that they left behind. And that's part of their identity. And I think it's a positive part because it drives them to do and to be who they can be, not only for themselves, but for others. The negative, the downside is that there is great expectation, in particular if they left family behind, for them to support the families that they were left behind and to bring them over. And Australia has very, very strict laws in terms of migration. Sometimes it can take years. And so that places a huge, huge burden on the people who did make it, were able to arrive to the country.
Gracias.
Very briefly, there's not much time left. Yeah, first of all, thank you all. Thank you, Dan, as well. It's been a very rich morning. 3 things very briefly. First of all, in English. Spirituality matters. The evidence is here. Spirituality makes a difference, clearly. Spirituality matters. It changes the lives of people, and on the basis of the witnesses, the positive witnesses, I mean, I know it's not the only thing there is, but for the time being, let's go to the positive side. This is the first reflection. Second thought to share with you, and it contrasts with the first, because what's very obvious in this room is not either acknowledged by states or societies or institutions. It's very clear to us, but nobody gives $1 for the promotion of spirituality, or a euro, no money. Spanish legislation doesn't really know what all that is about. The church itself doesn't really promote spirituality. I mean, if you know what I mean, yeah? The parishes organize activities. And the third thought I would like to share is that on the basis of this contradiction, I identify a role for the spiritual exercises in the world. And it's the promotion of spirituality. And I don't mean Christian spirituality, because I think that there are efforts, such like in English still, that eventually could be applied as well to another kind of believer, yeah, or persons who are not believers. But of the exercises that we analyzed yesterday, and also we'll be working on this on Thursday, well, I think that from this comes a mission in the contemporary world, where not religions, but rather spirituality is an argument, and it demands and promotes this. That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. And we also thank Frank, Sasha, Sandra, and Ramon for what they shared today. Thank you so much.